Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming to our candidate forum on law enforcement in Butte County. I'm Diane Suzuki, and I'm a founding member of CC4J, Concerned Citizens for Justice. I'd like to thank the forum team, Margaret, Robin, Molly, and George, and thanks to the Women's Club, to Corey Keith, our sound technician, Riken from BCAC TV, and the many volunteers. CC4J is an information and advocacy group that's focused on law enforcement issues, and you can get a copy of the summary of our 8-point action plan at the CC4J table in the back with the big banner. We envision a culture of policing that values the dignity of the community, eliminates the use of excessive force, and preserves human life. We want to see our local police as guardians of community safety. We are supported by a dozen local organizations and over 300 individuals. Please check out our website and Facebook page at cc4jchico.org. And when you filled out your question card, please raise your hand and Lolita will come around with the basket. And I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight, Molly Paul.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you to everyone here for coming. Also would like to thank, on behalf of CC4J, our candidates, Mr. Jeffries, Supervisor Lucero, and Supervisor Ritter. The purpose of tonight's forum, as Diane said, is to offer Butte County community an opportunity to pose their questions to the county supervisor candidates on the topic of law enforcement. The Butte County Board of Supervisors consists of 5 members, each of whom is elected from the district in which he or she resides. The board exercises the legislative, administrative, and appellate powers prescribed to it by the California State Constitution and statutes, the Butte County Charter, and the Butte County Code. For tonight's forum, all county supervisor candidates were invited to attend. We regret Mr. Durfee and Ms. Murphy-Waldorf were not able to be here. All present candidates have been informed of the rules prior to this evening's event, and the candidates drew straws to determine the order to start this evening. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement, and after opening statements, we will rotate who begins each round of questions, and then each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. To close, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their closing statements. As was discussed with the candidates prior, we ask all speakers tonight to uphold the utmost respect for one another and refrain from any personal attacks or comments during other speakers' time. We ask that all candidates please respect our timekeeper as well, who will be ensuring that we stay within the allotted time given so that each candidate can have an equal opportunity to respond to tonight's questions. CC4J has prepared questions to start, and we'll be sorting questions from the public as well as giving the press an opportunity to ask their questions. I will be rotating between those 3 groups. If you have not already submitted your questions, you can find cards and pens at the table in the back that can be placed in the basket with our volunteers who will be coming up and down the aisles, and then they'll be bringing those questions to the sorters. Just as a reminder, please hold any applause or comments during the forum out of respect for tonight's speakers, as well as take a moment now to silence your phones if you have not already. Just as a reminder, anyone not being able to abide by these rules may be asked to leave. We are looking forward to a very civil and interesting conversation tonight, and tonight's forum will close at 8:20 when we will begin closing statements to be finished by 8:30. We will not be taking an intermission during the forum, so if you need to get water or use the restroom, you can find water over here at the table to my left, as well as you can find bathrooms in the lobby where you entered. Again, we would like to thank you all for being part of this very important conversation, as well as thanking the candidates for their offer of service to the community and for their time this evening. To begin, we will start with opening statements, and as given with the drawing of the straws, Mr. Jeffries will be getting tonight's. Yes, of course.
The questions have to be only on law enforcement issues, please, and really write legibly so our service can read them.
Thank you. Just to repeat that, just a reminder that all questions tonight will be on the topic of law enforcement, and to make sure that it's written legibly. So thank you, Diane, for that reminder. All right, so we will begin with opening statements, starting with Mr. Jeffries.
Hello, I'm Carl Jeffries. I'm a longtime resident of Chico, and my great-grandfather, Manuel Dutra, jumped a whaling ship to be here in the mid-1800s. I went to Shasta Elementary and then Bidwell Junior High and Pleasant Valley High School, and then went off to Humboldt State, where I got a Bachelor of Science in Biology. And then I went to work in the Southwest for the tribes of the U.S., providing government services, teaching them how to write grants, helping them with their programs, developing first responder trainings, MERT groups, all those different kind of groups. And I did this for a dozen years, and then I went and had my own company called Mighty Wind Environmental. And later on, I guess there was a movie, Mighty Wind, but a different thing. And I went and I trained governments, tribes, little communities, industry throughout America. And my wife 4 years ago asked, can't we move back to Chico? Because we're both from Chico and we've been married for 35 years. And so I moved back, and I've been working as an environmental health and safety manager at a factory in Oroville, California. When I came back, I was disappointed in a lot of things that seemed like quality of life was slipping from when I had left, which was 25 years ago. The problems with the homeless, problems with crime. When I was a kid, I'd ride my bike to Bidwell Park all summer. I loved it. I don't think a lot of parents nowadays would be happy with their kids going out of the park because I don't think they'd feel safe. Every morning when I go to work, I have to clear the homeless from the parking areas, and sometimes they climb over the fence. But every single day, it's a running problem that we have. Because of that, I think that I would like to throw my hat in and see if I could help out.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
Hi, my name is Deborah Lucero. I am sixth generation Butte County, born here and raised in, hello, there I am again. Okay, I'm still here and the story's still the same. Raised in Corning. Public safety is actually something that is very near and dear to my heart. My dad was a volunteer fireman and fire chief in our little town for 35 years. So we grew up with a plectron going off in the middle of the night and at all hours, and attended many firemen's barbecues, and I made many trips down the pole in the Corning, not pole dancing, mind you, but going down the pole in the fire station. And it was just the way we grew up. And I think people have forgotten that public safety is two words. It's public and it's safety. And so the public has a responsibility, and those who keep us safe have a responsibility to the public, to keep the public as part of that two-word phrase that keeps us safe. I too have a lot of concerns about what Chico is and what it's becoming. But I think I have a rosier picture. Now, I haven't been gone for 25 years, but I've had the opportunity to visit many places. And when I come back to Chico and I look around, I think how very fortunate we are. And the problems that we face here in Chico are not unlike the problems that Red Bluff faces, or San Francisco, or LA, or San Diego, or Boise, Idaho. We all face similar issues. It's just a matter of what we do to face those issues. So I'm concerned about behavioral health. I'm concerned about training for our sheriffs and our police officers. I'm concerned about how much time they get to train. And I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you, Supervisor Lucero.
Hi, I'm Tammy Ritter, and I'm the current supervisor for District 3. And I am not from Butte County. I am I feel like it's a requirement to say how many generations have been here. My child is the first generation of Butte County, was born up in Paradise. But Butte County is my chosen home. I've lived throughout the county, in Butte Valley, in Brush Creek, and in the urban areas of Chico as well. So I have a love for all of this county, not just the city parts that we seem to focus on so much with these discussions. My interest in this topic, I was a foster parent about 20 years ago, and I had a teen foster who came to live with me when she was 13, and she moved out a couple weeks before her 18th birthday. And she became judicially involved, and that really sparked my interest in restorative justice. And so after having a master's degree in developmental psychology, I went back to school to get a master's degree in restorative justice because I wanted to see how we could implement this in our community. My focus is always on prevention, with the acknowledgement that we often have to have a response as well. So just like all of the social services that I support, I feel the best thing that we can do to keep our community safe is to prevent people from entering into the judicial system in the first place. So I too am looking forward to a very interesting conversation tonight.
Thank you, Supervisor Ritter. Okay, our first question from CC4J, starting with Supervisor Lucero, is in 21st century policing, law enforcement is called upon to be guardians, not warriors, to build trust and legitimacy, both within agencies and with the public. What police reform do you see as needed in Butte County, and what will you do to enact this reform?
Okay, I'm sorry, but the thing was going off during the
No,
whole time.
it's okay.
Could you please repeat
I'm
that?
happy to repeat the question.
Okay.
In 21st century policing, law enforcement is called upon to be guardians, not warriors, to build trust and legitimacy both within agencies and with the public. What police reform do you see as needed in Butte County, and what will you do to enact this reform?
Well, I think when you talk about reforms, I think the most critical aspect is training. You can put cameras on bodies, you can do different policies, but it really always comes down to the training. Because when you're acting in the moment, you're going to do what you were trained to do. And I know many cities have created the crisis mobile teams like we have, but instead of police responding, they make a call. So if there's 2,000 calls in a city, the police may only go out on 150 of those calls where they're really needed. I think we really need to start understanding what are the calls that we're responding to. So if I were to look at a reform, I would look at what are the calls that we are responding to. Is there a better way to respond to those calls if they are really mental health involved? I think that would be the greatest single thing that I could see as a reform.
Thank you, Supervisor Lucero.
Same question.
Thank you.
So very recently, the training that officers were required to have for a critical incident went to 8 hours. And they are now also trained by someone who is on the force. So there's one individual at the agency who will be trained for 16 hours to be a training of trainers. And then they will train the other officers for 8 hours. And the actual critical incident training that we hear so much about is a 40-hour training. So we were looking at having the critical incident training at Butte College reinstated. There were some significant challenges with it, and I believe a lot of it was the culture of the training. So I think it would be beneficial for us to be bringing in outside trainers. We shouldn't assume that we are the experts in this, and we should rely on the experts to help us see things that perhaps we don't see ourselves. So I would love to see expansion of behavioral health services. I would love to see critical incident training. But one of the areas where I feel like we have a huge call for law enforcement to respond is related to substance use and substance abuse. And we really need to come up with a better solution in this county and in the surrounding counties, so working regionally to address those substance use disorders, because jail is not the appropriate place for someone who is under the influence, and the back of a police car is not the appropriate way that an officer should be spending their time.
Thank you, Supervisor Ritter.
I think that it should be a partnership with behavioral health and the police, and they should be working together. Every day when I'm dealing with the folks on the street, I see a lot of people that are psychotic or don't know where they're at, or are just trying to find a place to stay out of the rain. But calling in the police every time seems like we're using all of our resources to take care of the people that are on those streets. I think it'd be better that we had a different kind of response, a community response with behavioral health, maybe with a van or something like that, that they go around to the different people and talk to them, find out what their problems before it becomes a real problem, find out if they need a shelter or something, find out what those needs are first. This issue hits me hard. 2 of my nieces, one of them in Oroville, died of substance abuse, and this is in the last 3 years. It does hit home sometimes to all of us. She didn't need to go through the cycle of being put in jail and released and put in jail and released. She needed help, but the current system doesn't help. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. We'll now accept our first question from the media. Does the media have a question?
Hello, everybody. My first question is, what is your opinion on the use of military-grade equipment by law enforcement as designated by the state of California?
Yeah, that's a good topic, especially considering our last local city council meeting and the acceptance of equipment. You know, I think that for everyday policing, and if we are really moving towards a community policing model, then that is not the image that we need to be portraying. I do believe that there are times when it has been absolutely appropriate. I know that there have been calls that the Butte County Sheriff's Office has gone on where I have been very grateful that they had the military equipment that they had, because it kept our officers safe and it made it able for them to resolve a situation without any loss of life. And I think that it does not have to be all or nothing, but I do believe if we're going to move towards a community policing model, the image of tanks rolling down the street or armored vehicles is not the way that we communicate to our community that the police are here to help, the police are our friends, the police are on our side. I have the same opinion when I see the sometimes 18-year-old guards, armored guards that are in full military apparel, wandering around, keeping our downtown safe. I don't think that the image of someone in military apparel does anything to build trust and to build community.
Thank you.
I don't like the idea of military gear for our police. We're still a pretty friendly community. Most of our issues don't go to that level. I think that when we do have that occurrence where we do have a violent offender, that the gear that we already have should be enough. Though I do want to make sure that our police are safe, I don't want to see everything ramped up like that. I think that's the wrong approach.
Thank you.
I too am troubled by military equipment. I know that some of it's necessary, and I know that oftentimes the police department or the sheriff's department would actually not characterize the gear and the equipment and the vehicles that they have as military-grade equipments. equipment. But something comes back to me when I was in Mexico when I was young. I think I was about 21, and I remember getting on a public bus, and the Federales police got on the bus, and they had, you know, bullets across their chest, and they had their guns out, and I had never been exposed to anything like that in my life, and it frightened me, and it made an impression on me. And I think that vehicles like this, guns that are militaristic, all of that makes impressions upon people. So we have to decide, you know, what kind of society do we want to be? If we want to be a society that is not filled with fear and is not fear-based, and we're not afraid to go to the parks, we're not afraid to ride our bikes, then we need to rethink how we deploy some of this equipment. Additionally, a friend of mine took some snapshots of gear that was being sent to, apparently to the Ukraine. And it was military tanks and such, and it was on I-5. And it was shocking to see that. Everybody was kind of, wow, what's that? And it went around on Facebook. So I think in America, we are still rather shocked at those ideas. And I think for the health of our American society, we need to remain shocked at those ideas.
Thank you. Our first question from the audience tonight. In today's news, there were incidents in the jail reported involving the mentally ill. What alternatives do you envision for the mentally ill in our community? Starting with Mr. Jeffries.
Well, I think that we should develop a behavioral health facility at an, let's say, in between Oroville and Chico in an unincorporated area that's specifically for that. It's not to be a NIMBY or anything like that, but I think that we need an area where we could find out the issues, solve these issues. Don't just have a revolving door at INLO or at the jail, but an actual area just for behavioral health, just for drug addiction, just for people who have mental issues. I don't think that our current system of just having a revolving door is the answer. When I have to call the police because I have someone psychotic, I really feel bad about it, because that person, where do they go? Do they go to the jail? Do they go to the INLO? I know that within a day they're back, so it must not really be working. We need a system, and I think the system should be an actual center, a behavioral health center.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
Well, as you may be aware, it's very difficult to do exactly what Mr. Jeffries has described, simply because there are laws in place that prohibit someone from being held against their will for more than 72 hours. We have 5150 holds, you know, and many issues with, we have Laura's Law trying to get some of those folks with deep behavioral health problems off the streets. But even in the counties that have Laura's Law, I think there are 17 or 18 counties, something like that. They estimated that their counties maybe got 2 to 3 individuals off the streets that were deeply disturbed people. And what happened with that? It cost $1 million per person. That's not sustainable. That's not what the answer is. But Butte County recently came up with an innovation program out of MHSA funds called REST. It's Resilient Empowerment Support Team. And the idea is to target the most egregious behavior out there. And there's really about 22 to 25. I've heard the DA call some of these folks rubber bandits. They are people that continually go through the system. They go through that revolving door. Those are the people that we need to target. Those are the ones that need that help. And now we have a $3.5 million targeted exactly toward this concept. And it's not a Laura's Law. It's going to be more effective than Laura's Law because it's more I don't want to say lenient. It gives us more leeway to go after these folks and get them help. So they'll be working in conjunction with CHAT and right out there in what is becoming kind of behavioral health land. So I'm excited about this.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have lots of behavioral health facilities, from our PUF to outpatient to our SUD clinics. We just don't have enough. And as we know, the governor's putting into place this care court. Again, the same criticisms that we hear, that we cannot treat someone either against their will or that whose behavioral health issue makes it such that they do not recognize they have a behavioral health issue. There's lots of folks who have tried medication, but they don't like the way that it makes them feel, or they feel like they can't feel anything. And so how do you convince a person who maybe is having psychotic episodes once or twice a year to stay on medication every single day of the year and feel horrible? So the program that Supervisor Lucero described, it has a flexibility to it. And I think as we are attempting to address mental health issues, that's what we need. We need innovation and we need flexibility, because there are no two situations that are going to be exactly the same, and we need to be able to be responsive to folks and whatever it is that they are experiencing.
Thank you. Our next question is from CC4J. It'll be answered first by Supervisor Lucero. The sheriff uses Lexapol, a for-profit criminal justice company, to write our use of force policy. What will you do to support a local use of force policy that encourages officers to use de-escalation and humane policing?
Well, I think all policy starts with discussion. And so my biggest hope, of course, is that this is not some item on the consent agenda, but this is something that we discuss in open session, and we have a good, healthy dialogue about it. Again, public safety is two words. The public needs to be involved in the safety policies that are set in our communities. That doesn't mean they need to be behind the scenes with every decision that's made, but I really believe that the more the public is involved and the more that they understand what sheriffs do in and out every day, and the more they understand what the police officers are doing in our city, what they're doing every single day, the dialogue goes both ways. And you begin to have a deep understanding. It's like making a friendship. It really is. And that's community-based policing. We really need more of that. So I would like to have a healthy dialogue about it. I would like to have people show up for that discussion. Oftentimes when we're talking about very important things, we don't have a lot of people in the audience. So we need people like you to show up, to help change the dialogue. If you have strong feelings about it, you need to show up, because I'm just one person, and Supervisor Ritter's just one person, and it's going to take 3 people on the Board of Supervisors to set that policy. So we definitely need the voice of the people during those discussions.
Thank you.
My first question would be, what does that policy look like right now? I don't know that it doesn't have de-escalation in it. So that would be the first thing that I would want to see. Is I'm not going to write off a policy because it was written by an outside contractor or a consultant, because presumably those folks are experts in their field. And so I would hope that we are getting the best possible policy that we can. And I do believe that we have a sheriff's department that is responsive to its residents and who listens. So I think that if we read the policy and it doesn't have de-escalation techniques inside it, it doesn't have any training on implicit bias, then that's when we open it up to a community discussion to say, what do we want to see in here that isn't in here, and what's in here that doesn't need to be? So, I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want to see the policy first.
Thank you.
I have worked with stakeholder groups along the southern border, and we worked with the federales, and we worked with this side of the border. We worked with the farmers and ranchers along the border and developed policies there for that kind of thing, for de-escalation, but also to have the community understand what was going on and what the roles of the police and what were the roles of them as citizens were. I think that's a big part of this, is letting the public in on it and be part of it. And if the community is in on it and understands it, it all tends to work better, and we have less bad feelings both directions.
Thank you. We'll now accept another question from the media.
Hello, Andre at North State Public Radio. Can you share what your opinions are on citizen law enforcement oversight boards, and are they needed in Butte County?
Starting with Supervisor Ritter.
I never think it's a bad idea to have an oversight board. I think you called it a citizen oversight. I'd rather call it a resident oversight board. As we know, a lot of the situations that could benefit from oversight are not necessarily people with legal standing. So if we're truly looking at protecting those that are most disenfranchised, then I don't think there's any problem with a community oversight board. And I think that it also improves relations a lot. I think that if you have folks who are meeting regularly with representatives from our law enforcement agencies, we are going to have better relationships, we're going to have better communication, and I think that that can only benefit the community. So I'm supportive.
Thank you.
Yeah, I support oversight boards in every way. I think that oversight boards open it up to the public, that they're not, the government is not perceived to be working in a vacuum. Everybody's questions and answers could be brought up in a forum. I think that is the way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
I too think an oversight board is a good idea. And I always like to see these things done before they're legislated. And, you know, it took legislation to open up public records, police records. I would like to see this done before it's legislated. It could get legislated. So when it's done on a voluntary basis and when it's done between the public and the policing agencies, I think you're going to have a better outcome rather than having something legislated. So I'm all in favor of this.
Thank you, Supervisor Lucero. The next question is from our audience. It'll be answered first by Mr. Jeffries. According to Police Scorecard, the first nationwide evaluation of policing in the USA, Butte County Sheriff's Agency had 9 killings by police from 2013 to 2020, 4.7 killings for every 10,000 arrests. This was more killings by police per arrest than 93% of departments. What policies do you propose to stop this travesty?
I don't know the circumstance of each one of these. It might be just a fluke. It might be that we have violent situations and we need to have more de-escalation. I do believe that the majority of police officers never have to shoot anybody. That isn't, it's actually a very small number. So hearing that number, it's surprising. Though we do live in a much more dangerous society now than we used to.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
Well, I'm going to say that I too am surprised by that number. I don't like to see any numbers like that, if at all possible. But I do believe that we would need to look into this. I know that in our county system right now, we have 450 openings. We are down, I think, 15 deputies in the sheriff's department. We are understaffed, and this is something that I believe can contribute to incidents and stress. And then you have to remember, that we have been in nothing but disaster since 2017, starting with the Oroville Dam spillway. And it's these very sheriffs and police officers and people that are helping all of us. And in addition to working through disaster, they're still doing their workload. Maybe it's at the jail, maybe it's out on the roads, maybe it's a call to a neighbor who's bothering another neighbor. But I do know that we're understaffed. And we aren't the only ones. You know, this is, again, happening all over the nation. It's particularly happening in California, and particularly up here. It's all of the police officers, the police departments are vying for each other's police officers. They're giving signing bonuses. They're doing all kinds of things. So I think it's definitely something to look at, and I would like to look more into the cause of each one of those deaths. I have read about several of them, but being the person I am, I like to get a lot of information before I just make broad statements. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that we have to look at this as a whole entire system. And so we talk about how many shootings there were, how many deaths there were, you know, and there's lots of things that contribute, from being understaffed and having an officer who has worked overtime and hasn't taken a vacation day or had a day off in weeks, to not having the emotional supports necessary to deal with the stress of the job, to deal with the trauma that they've experienced. We all know with law enforcement, it's a lot harder to get folks to, you know, take an hour and go see a counselor or talk about what they've experienced. There's a certain culture. One of the approaches we took post-Campfire was to fund an app that our officers could use so they could log in and get some processing or some therapy without having to sit face-to-face with someone. But it's the entire system, right? We're not talking about our dispatchers. What do we know about, you know, 11 calls, you know, stating that there was an emergency? Did those dispatchers have the training that they needed? Did they have the support that they needed? Have they gone through crisis intervention training and de-escalation training? Because it's all connected, from the person who makes the call to the person who receives it, to whatever message is sent out to our officers. And so we have to look at this as a full system. We can't look at this, you know, in a little bubble.
Thank you. Our next question is from CC4J. As stated earlier, we discussed military equipment. AB 481 requires public meetings and open community comment, which currently have not been held at the county level. How will you assure the voter that AB 481 is followed by law enforcement in Butte County? And this will start with Supervisor Lucero.
Well, I do know that this is on my radar. I've had several emails about it, and I have forwarded those to the sheriff and to our CAO, and I would like to make sure that we're following the law. So I suspect it will be coming on an agenda soon in open session. So if it does, I would encourage everyone here to be at that session. If you have questions or want to bring forth your ideas or your concerns, that would definitely be the time to do it. So in terms of assuring that it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how to follow that, except to say that this is the power of public process, right? Once it's in the public eye, the county is going to do everything they can do to avoid any liability in any situation. So once it's brought to light that things aren't public that need to be, or transparent in the way that they need to be, you know, that's going to go before the board, it's going to go before our legal counsel, and it's going to be heard.
Thank you.
Wow, a lot said. Yeah, I think public comment is the most important thing on this, and that we need to have more than just one session. We need to make sure that everybody is heard.
Thank you. We'll now accept another question from the media.
So my question now is, what is your philosophy on police funding, police spending, and do you feel that the sheriff's office is adequately funded?
Well, I mean, we're understaffed. So I think if we were adequately funded, we would also likely be adequately staffed. But there's a lot of decisions that have to be made in terms of keeping vacancies in order to have those dollars to spend elsewhere, or having to spend part of their allocations on overtime. So I don't think that there is any department at the county that I would say is overfunded. I look at this budget every year and I wonder how we are going to pass this budget, knowing that every year we're having to cut services or positions. And so I would say no, none of our departments are adequately funded. And if we're talking specifically about law enforcement, then we can't leave out the discussion of behavioral health. We can't leave out the discussion of our Department of Employment and Social Services, because those are the most basic services that need to be offered to people. We look at Maslow's hierarchy. If people don't have shelter, if they don't have food, if they are not safe, then they can't be thinking about anything else. So no, our sheriff is not overfunded, nor is any other department of our county.
Thank you.
I don't believe that the police are overfunded. I believe that they actually need more police officers out there. When they have to be the people who care for the homeless and have to care for all these other issues that shouldn't be a police issue, they spend all their time doing that and not going after the offending people that are out there. If we had those positions taken up by behavioral health, another thing that's not funded well, then the police would be adequately funded. But right now, as it stands, they're not.
Thank you.
Well, as I indicated before, we have 450 positions open in the county, and we have many positions in the sheriff's department. A common theme is that the deputies are underpaid in comparison to other counties, underpaid. So I think it is an issue for our county, but again, we are not alone. When I was in Washington, D.C. for a NACO conference, the National Association of Counties, I was watching television late at night, and then an ad came on, and it was for Maryland police officers. And the starting pay was $51,000. And I was shocked, So comparatively, here in California, police officers seemingly make a good wage. But again, they have comparators, and we are doing a compensation study at the county that will tell us how well are we doing compared to the 8 other counties that we compare to. And I think that's going to tell us where we land. Is our sheriff's department adequately funded? And if it's not, we're going to have to do something about it, and we're going to have to figure out where are other areas that we can cut. If that's what we need to do. It's going to be a lot of hard decisions. It's not going to be easy. I think we have 16 bargaining units, and they are one of them. So once we get this compensation study, I think we will be able to look at what they're paid, look at their comparators, and see where they fall, and figure out what we need to do.
Thank you. Our next question is from the audience. Starting with Mr. Jeffries, what is your opinion on mandatory anti-bias 3-week training for the police force?
Well, I'm for any anti-bias training. I'm for more training, but the way the police force right now is as they were talking about, they are working overtime, they're stretched to their limits. You know, how much training can they get in? You know, it's important that they know how to respond when they're in that critical situation. But at the same time, we need more police officers so that they're not stretched out too far.
Thank you.
I just think implicit bias training should be something that they receive at the academy. That should be part of what they do from day one. That is something that should be part of how they think. It should be part of how they're trained. When you're dealing with multicultural society like California is, it just needs to be that way from the beginning. I don't think it's like an add-on or frosting on a cupcake. It's just something that should be part of training. It's good training for all of us.
Thank you.
I agree with that. I would love to see it embedded into the post-training. But I would like to see the critical incident embedded into post-training as well. If we wait until our officers are officers before we give them this training, they're going to be on a regular shift. They're going to be working on their beat. They're not going to be able to take a week or 3 weeks to do a training. So I think any training is beneficial. You know, we have to take a sexual harassment training every single year. It's great. It's a great refresher. Why aren't we taking an implicit bias training? I assume that all of our folks in all of our departments are doing those trainings as well, and I don't think it would be too much to put in some of those smaller trainings as well.
Thank you. Our next question is from CC4J. The Oversight Board of Supervisors has law enforcement. The oversight of the Board of Supervisors has over law enforcement is through the budget. How will you use the power of that oversight to guide law enforcement?
I'm sorry, is that mine?
It is starting with, no, I can repeat it. The oversight of the Board of Supervisors, the oversight the Board of Supervisors has over law enforcement is through the budget.
Okay,
How will you use the power of that oversight to guide law enforcement?
got it. Okay. You know, really, the Office of the Sheriff is a completely separate office, and it is the only oversight we have is their budget. And the sheriff will come to us with budget requests or budget adjustments throughout the year. In terms of how we use it, I hope we use it cooperatively with each other. I hope we are having a dialogue. I don't want to be in the position of me telling the sheriff, hey, you got to do this. Nobody likes to be told what to do. He's his own elected office. So if there is something that is really needed that's on the table, that should be a dialogue, again, with the board. That's what we are. And if it's coming down to like some of the nearby counties, Sacramento, I think they're in crisis. Their board is at odds with their sheriff. I would hate to see that happen in this county. And I think we have a good relationship with our sheriff. If citizens are concerned that there is spending that is out of whack, once you examine the budget, that's what we're here for. We're here to hear your concerns, and we will take those to the sheriff, and we will take those to the proper people to find out why was this said? Is there a problem here? I see that as my job. If a concern is brought to me, it's my job to take that concern to the person who can answer the question. So that's how I see my oversight.
Thank you.
One of the responsibilities that Supervisor Lucero and I have with the Behavioral Health Advisory Board is on the Contract Review Committee. And it's amazing how many contracts we approve every single meeting. And yeah, contracts that are millions of dollars that previously just appeared on the consent agenda. And now we can at least be sure that there are at least 2 pair of eyes that are reading these contracts in advance and making sure that there is nothing that stands out. We have had things brought to our attention, or we have seen things in the sheriff's budget or when he has asked for specific funding. Usually it's related to ICE, but we always have a dialogue with the sheriff if there are concerns, why we would be accepting funding or why we would be, for example, using a specific contractor in the jail, and what that contractor may or may not offer. So there have been ongoing discussions, particularly in relationship to medically assisted therapies in the jail and our current provider in the jail that we contract with. And so that's the way that I will continue to use my position for oversight.
Thank you.
Using money as a coercion or as an oversight tool, I don't think is the right thing, especially with tight budgets that we have. And it also looks bad. But dialogue always works. And if it doesn't, then you bring it to the voter, you bring it to the public, you bring it to oversight committees, but not through money.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Our next question will be to the media.
This question is disaster related. As we know, more than 100 people in Butte County have died in wildfires, tragically. The Sheriff's Office is heavily involved in the emergency notification process. Is the Sheriff's Office failing folks who need critical information when a fire is approaching?
This question will start with Supervisor Ritter.
No, the sheriff is not failing with notifications, but notifications are absolutely a challenge and absolutely something that we have been working on. The campfire was fast, and there were people who didn't receive notification, and even if they had working cell service or whatever else, they might not have received that notification. So we have had a big focus on our WUI communities that are, do not have good broadband, where we don't have a lot of services. We have budgeted and paid for the Alert FM. And we are now waiting for the Alert FM, which is a alert system that goes over radio waves. So even if the internet or power is down, it has a battery backup and can notify whether you need to evacuate or whether you need to shelter in place. So yeah, I would not put a lack of notification as a failing of our sheriff's office, but I would say that over the last couple of disasters, absolutely our vulnerabilities have come to light, and with each disaster we are responding to them and attempting to make everyone safer. So yeah, it's not a perfect system.
Thank you.
I could only speak to, as a citizen, of what I saw the morning of the campfire. I was walking outside and I looked and I saw a plume of smoke up in Polga, and I ran inside and told about 30 of our workers who I knew worked up in Paradise to do something to get up there and, evacuate their loved ones and that kind of thing. And about a third of them could not get a hold of anybody. And what I've seen, in the paper, in the public, and in the meetings is that they are working towards that. They are working towards getting a system up there. Back when this occurred, I don't think there was much of a system at all, and a lot of cell phones didn't even work.
Thank you.
Well, and it's true that our communication system went down. We had sheriffs who could not talk to the other emergency personnel. So, but the FM system holds a lot of promise. It begins to be really difficult when people are, you're choosing to live in a remote area. So again, it's going to be difficult to make sure that everyone gets out safely. Paradise was not necessarily remote. That was a town on the ridge, it was, but we're talking about some of these remote areas that are challenged by broadband. They are challenged by having proper notifications of anything. I'm concerned also about FM alerts, to be honest. Will those reach in those little nooks and crannies? You lose signal for some radio stations when you go to Oroville. So we know that none of these systems are perfect. Would I blame it on the sheriff? No. Would I say he's failing at his job? No, not at all. He has to make some of the most difficult calls there are, and he made the call to evacuate 180,000 people when the dam, the spillway, looked as though it were going to fail. I would not want to be in his shoes, but I can tell you that we are all working toward figuring out, and we are not the only community, again, trying to do this. Sonoma has had to do this, Ventura, all of these counties that are in harm's way are trying to figure out this very thing. But we are very challenged here. We have a lot of ridges and dips and valleys. So is it his fault? No.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the audience, and it will be answered first by Mr. Jeffries. For the sake of safety, RNs must graduate from an accredited program and pass a national exam. If a citizen has concerns about the actions of an RN, they may complain to the State Board of Nursing, and the complaint will be investigated. What do you all think about requiring law enforcement to have a state certification and oversight like registered nurses?
I think that getting officers trained is the most important thing, and to make sure that they're properly trained. But certifications aren't always what we need. We need officers. We need more officers. If they can get that certification and have more officers, that's great, but I want to see more police out on the beat. I want to have more of these folks out there, and if we work together with them, I think that we could maybe go around that. Maybe it isn't that important.
Thank you.
Well, it's the first time I've really heard of this idea, and it's an interesting idea. I do know that in speaking to people in the Sheriff's Department recently, they are finding that it's very difficult to keep newly recruited people that have gone through the training, gone through the academy, done all of that, been on the beat for a year, and then they quit. So we are having a hard time attracting police officers, sheriffs, etc., to this job. Is it the culture? Is it the training? Is it a lack of something? Is it not high enough pay? I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. Will certification help? I don't know about that either, but I do think that everything starts with training, and everything starts, with anything. If you're going to set a foundation for a profession, it starts with the proper training. And you want to make sure that people are psychologically adept at that type of job, that they're going to be able to handle the stress of a job like that. So I've never been a police officer. I've never gone through that training, and I don't have a police officer in my family. But my parents are educators, and I do believe in education, and I believe that something like a certification might be an interesting idea. It might also be an interesting idea to have an oversight board or something like that. I do not know how that would be handled. I can imagine a bureaucratic nightmare. I would rather it be on the local level and have a citizens or a residents oversight committee locally.
I think it's a really interesting idea because if we are recruiting officers that are coming from another community where maybe there were issues, that would be a way that we would know, oops, this person had some licensing issues at their last or credentialing issues at their last position. So it's an interesting idea in that way. I know when we're working on our contracts with law enforcement and public safety in general, we look at specialty pay. We look at the areas where our officers have specific training that is above and beyond what is offered in the post-training. And I don't think that that's a bad idea. I think that, we could be folding CIT training into a specialty pay. We could be folding implicit bias training into specialty pay. And then we are kind of creating these great officers that are not only have these developed skills and training, but they are also being compensated. And so I think from a morale perspective, that could be beneficial as well. So I haven't heard about the kind of credentialing. It's an interesting concept, but I think if that were to happen, it would need to happen with the police officer standards training, with their post-training, prior to them coming to whatever jurisdiction they're going to.
Thank you. Our next question is from CC4J. It'll be answered first by Supervisor Lucero. What method should be used to hold deputies accountable for excessive use of force?
Well, I think it first starts with an investigation and what kind of excessive force was used. It seems that, at least nationally, when these incidents occur, we are learning about them more quickly, mainly because of the type of equipment that officers are equipped with, whether it's a body camera and there's media to force the issue. If we hear about an incident, we have so many citizen reporters that when somebody is being arrested and it happens on a Chico street, many times people witness it. So I believe that being transparent is always the best way to handle something like this. If there is a belief that excessive force has been used. Transparency is just the way to go. And today, with cameras everywhere, with everyone having a cell phone, it's very easy to discern if this occurred, typically. Now, if you're out in the boondocks somewhere and it's your word against the sheriff's, that's a different story. And that's when investigation needs to occur. But in terms of how to handle it, I think now, I'm really not sure what I have to admit, I don't know what our policy is. I don't know how if we give them time off during the investigation. I'm not sure. I would really need to look that up. I feel a little bit inadequate to answer that.
Thank you.
I think one of the issues is that when there is an incident that occurs with our law enforcement, it is our same law enforcement's internal affairs that is doing the investigation. And I think that is part of the problem. I think that there needs to be some outside body that can be objective, that doesn't know this officer, doesn't know their family, and go to barbecues with them on the weekend, or is a member of the union with them, or whatever else. I think there needs to be an independent body that looks at the situation just to ensure, and maybe it's a panel of both people inside the force but also people outside the force, so that there can be some objectiveness about what has occurred. So I think that's the most I can offer to that. I know that when someone is under investigation, they are not actively out policing our community. They're either on administrative leave or awaiting the decision of the investigation. So I don't know enough about specific types of use of force and how they would rate differently.
Thank you.
I think it really has to do with patterns. When you look in the media and you look in the paper and you find out in the community, there's usually a policeman that stands out, that he's been doing a lot of that kind of activity. He's been a little bit more aggressive than he should be, and a lot of the things. It could be a personality issue. If that is the case, then yes, I think that we should be focusing on that officer more. Maybe we should be having the community looking in on his type of policing, because it's often the pattern that that person is showing.
Thank you. Our next question will be from the media, answered first by Supervisor Ritter.
So my next question is in relation to, kind of going back to code enforcement. Specifically, there's been concerns of racial bias, not from officers necessarily, but perhaps from reporting parties related to cannabis grows and other issues. What's the best way that the county can look into that and potentially limit reports that could be biased from the community?
Well, we would start with a really good policy. That's where we would start. We wouldn't have a land use policy that is complaint driven, anonymously complaint driven. There's some benefit to that. I had, when I was supervisor of some of our mountain communities, I did have folks who wanted to complain about cannabis, but were not going to do it themselves. And so I had an open door policy. You tell me the complaint, and I will be the complaining party, right? So that their name would never be associated with it. I don't necessarily think that the bias is coming from the neighbors necessarily. I know, that maybe we'll hear from Supervisor Lucero on her opinion. I think it is the system. So if I am not a native English speaker, or if I have not grown up in an environment where I know that it is safe for me to walk into a city building or a county building, or if I am afraid that my license, which has lapsed, or my car registration, which has lapsed, may be called into question when I go in to address a code enforcement complaint, I'm not going to go in and address that complaint, right? Our systems are set up for people who use our systems. They are set up for the white people who are taking out permits for a well, or for a construction project, or to come in and pay their taxes. And so I feel where the bias is it's systemic. It is that these systems were not set up for everyone. And so just because I feel comfortable walking into a municipal building does not mean that everyone else does. It doesn't mean that if we're part of oh, I didn't even see my 30-second. He just red carded me.
Thank you.
I've seen this from both sides, and sometimes there is bias. Sometimes it is true, but I think by and large, most of the time it's not there. But when that person gets stung that one time, it tends to cause that thought in the community that there's implicit bias. I think that's, again, why the community needs to get together and talk about these things. If we speak together, if we work together, we could come out with a better community. But when we clam up, or we put it in a closed room, or we don't bring it out in the open, that's when we have an issue.
Thank you.
Well, I do have a problem. We don't have a good policy. The anonymous reporting concerns me. When at our last meeting, we had 9 cannabis lien cases, and 7 of them were people of color. When we have 1.9% African American population in Butte County, and 17.7% Latino population, and 7 out of 9 cases of those liens are black and brown people. Something's wrong. And 2 weeks before that, it was 9 out of the 11 cases. So something is not right. whether it's the policy or whatever. The other thing I don't like about our lien policy is that I had asked, well, had this happened before, with this property? And I guess when I asked that question, I asked exactly that question. And so the lien goes with the property. So even if it's a different person and the person has not owned that property, so say they just bought the property last year, but there was a lien or there was a cannabis bust on the property in 2015. That's now reported, and it was reported as though it was on this person that is now before us. But it's really the property. So I think there's some inherent issues with this whole lien process, but I am concerned about the bias. I do believe it's there, whether it's intentional or not, it's there. It's a fact. So at least from what I've seen as my 3 years, I finally couldn't stand it anymore and started saying it. And I will continue to say it every time these lien cases come before us, because it's true. And I'm now looking back on my entire time as supervisor to look at every single lien case, and I'm going to research them myself. And I want to learn how many of those 60 cases are Black and brown people.
Thank you. Our next question is from the audience. It's okay.
I just want to point out, the only people breaking the rules here are down there, not us.
Yes, it's been a very civil forum, and I thank you all for that. All right, so our next question is from the audience, starting with Mr. Jeffries. How can the public have meaningful input with law enforcement that will how can the public have meaningful input with law enforcement that will ensure serious consideration of transforming the image and actions of the police?
Well, as long as the interactions between the police and the citizen is treated in a level playing field, in a level way, and not as an authoritarian down on the person, especially if they develop a stakeholder group or a community group that they could speak regularly with that police officer so they get used to that police officer, and not in a situation where it's a rarity where they're not used to the police officer and they see them as an authoritarian instead of, this is our friend Sheriff Bill and he's working on this issue, and what have we seen and how can we work with him? I think that's the answer in that.
Thank you.
My answer is similar. I think that whenever you want to improve an image and there is a disconnect, which there seems to be a growing disconnect between the public and safety officers. I don't know when this started to happen, but it seems that over my lifetime, it has become more dramatic. It seems that, when I was a kid, I don't remember it being an us and them kind of mentality. And now I see more of that, us and them. And yet we are all Americans. We are all residents or citizens. And it's like, we need to come together, and I believe that a stakeholder group would be a good idea, and maybe it goes back to that Citizens Oversight Committee. I attend one meeting I particularly enjoy, and I want to give a shout out to District Attorney Mike Ramsey because he shows up at these meetings. I go to the NAACP meeting, he is there. I go to the Human Resource Network, which is a time when situations with the police can be discussed, situations with the DA's office can be discussed. I'm amazed at how open those meetings are and the discussions that can be had, and that's the healthy dialogue that we need in a community. And we need that with our local police department, and we need that with our sheriff's department. We do.
Thank you.
I think the community oversight board is a really good idea, but there are things, that are already happening. At least pre-pandemic were happening, where we would have police night out and they would, be in different communities in different areas of the city. Every Christmas there's Blue Santa. There are lots of things that law enforcement does to be involved in community. I think that bridging that gap would be having more officers attending, particularly the groups where folks are not feeling heard. So I know a lot of times the students have a lot of safety concerns, and so I think having a presence in student neighborhoods is a good idea. I also know that there's a lot of concern in the LGBTQ community, and so I think that police presence at Pride events would be a great idea. I think there's a lot of ways that our law enforcement could do outreach to build goodwill.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from CC4J, starting with Supervisor Lucero. What will you do to increase diversity, race, gender, and ethnicity in the Sheriff Department and all of law enforcement in Butte County?
Okay. Well, I think that starts with, again, how we recruit, people to these positions, to this profession. I think that we're having problems recruiting people to this profession right now. And I think it's going to take a different approach. I'm not sure what that approach is. I think we need to reach across to people of color, especially in our community. When we have so few people of color, I know that if you're like me, if I see a red light go on behind me, I panic, that shouldn't be our response, but usually it is our response. And somehow we need to help. I'm going to say this. I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say this. I have my son-in-law is African American, and there are literally streets, roads in Butte County that he does not feel comfortable driving down. So if somebody like my son-in-law can't drive down a road in Butte County, what does that say about diversity in our county? And how much more do we need it than for policing? It's even more essential. So it's something we need. What am I going to do about it? I don't know. Maybe just tell the story about my son-in-law. I hope he doesn't hear this. I know it's being recorded, but it's true. It's a true statement.
Thank you.
I think there are some things that are a little bit outside of the scope of what we are capable of doing as county supervisors. I do think that the culture that is created in any county is certainly can be influenced by the elected officials. So I will take responsibility there. But in terms of attempting to recruit more diversity, it's going to require us electing more diversity. And until we elect diversity, we are going to see the same colored people hired into positions of power, and we are going to see them hiring people that they feel comfortable with. So it really starts with the voters. What kind of community do you want, and who do you want to elect to represent you?
Thank you.
Our elected people tend to reflect the people that are voting for them. If more people get involved, we'll have those people. But I think we need a better sales program to get people from the inner city and stuff that are those folks that we'd love to get up here to enjoy our quality of life. Because that's why people come here, is that quality of life. If I was a policeman or a cadet in Oakland, I would much rather work up here than in Oakland. If I was someone working down in LA as a cop, I would much rather be up here. The quality of life is much better. I just think that we need to get the word out to them.
Thank you. We'll now accept our next question from the press.
Speaking to the scope of the job, does a county supervisor have a role in holding law enforcement to account? And what could that look like, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so as Supervisor Lucero has alluded to multiple times, a big part of our role is speaking out. It is saying what we're seeing or what we're hearing and asking the questions that no one else might be asking. In terms of holding a specific officer to account, no, you're talking about HR issues, and I wouldn't speak out about a specific individual or a specific incident, because there is a process that has to be followed. So in general terms, a supervisor can speak about, an incident, but they can't be specific about it if there is any kind of open investigation. And to go back to the earlier question, I really think a lot of it comes back to morale. On just the county, not even talking specifically about law enforcement as an individual department, but I know that when we have a particularly contentious meeting for the Board of Supervisors, that all of our department heads are on edge, and the county staff that are present, they are not feeling good about things. So there is a certain amount of tone setting that happens at the county level with supervisors, thank you, that I think we need to be cognizant of. But in terms of an individual incident or an individual officer, I would say no, I wouldn't.
Thank you.
I think that the supervisors are the voice of the people. And so in a general sense, yes, they should be saying something, but not in individual cases and not individual officers. But that dialogue needs to continue, and yes, the supervisor should have a say.
Well, I would just say that Supervisor Ritter really said it well. We're not going to get involved in personnel issues like that. But however, if there is an overall tone that is being set, or if there is a group of citizens that have come forward with a complaint, a specific complaint, as in the lack of having the military equipment policy brought before the Board of Supervisors, that was complained to me, and I think several boards of supervisor members got that same complaint. That's our job. That's when we get involved in those types of things, and we take it to the sheriff and or whoever it might be. It might be the DA's office. It might be actually a question that wasn't for the sheriff. It might be for the Chico PD. I've called the chief of police of Chico PD before with questions. So, our job, as I see it, is to represent the people. And representing the people means if the people have a question, we find out the answer. And we try to do that in a transparent way, in a public meeting, so that everybody can hear the answer. So even if we call ahead of time, we don't surprise, the sheriff, gotcha in the meeting. We call them ahead of time. We say, this is a concern. This is what's occurring. Can you help us with this? And I will be asking that question at the meeting so that he knows. He has a heads up that we're going to ask that question, or we're going to ask another department head a question. But that's how it should work. That's respect, and that's how you create dialogue. And then if that doesn't work, that's when you surprise them in the meeting. But I've never had to do that.
Thank you. Our next question is from the audience, starting with Mr. Jeffries. What services and innovative strategies is Butte County developing to provide de-escalation and conflict resolution in predominantly BIPOC communities in Chico, or could you envision?
I do not know, but what I'd like to see is behavioral health vans. I'd like to see more on the ground policing. In my neighborhood in North Chico, it's rare that I see any police at all, unless there's a call. You know, that's probably because we need more police in that area. But behavioral health out there would be great too, because most of the time it isn't a police issue, but it is where we have one neighbor saying, okay, who's this person wandering around in our orchard, or who's this person that is looking underneath garage doors?
Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay, so before my district was so carefully rearranged for me, I used to represent Chapmantown. And Chapmantown is a perfect example of a community of color. There are a lot of people in that area and that live in that town. Some of them never even go out of Chapmantown. I can't believe it, but it's true. But I would call Sheriff Honey if I had an issue. And you know, his deputies knew the people there. They policed that area. If someone was dropping off trash in an empty lot, I'd call him up. One time his deputies took out 2 tons of stuff out of the lot. They didn't have to do that, but they did do that. That's community policing. That's what it's about. It's about making relationship with the people that you know in communities of color. That's how it works. It works even if it's not a community of color. It's making relationship. And he did that really well. I miss representing Chapmantown, you know, and now it's part of the city. And I had several residents that, you know, they did not want to become part of the city because they did not want to lose the sheriff's department as their protection. They really felt that way. So that's creating relationship.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? Did you say what innovative programs?
What services and innovative strategies?
Okay, so what the county is doing right now, as you've all heard, is our mobile crisis co-response, which I think is a really good step in the right direction, where behavioral health workers go out on calls that have an identified behavioral health component to them with officers. So it's a co-response. But officers first secure the scene, right? We don't want to be sending our behavioral health workers into a dangerous situation. So I'm just speaking from personal experience. I made a call to 911, to Chico PD, requesting a mobile unit and saying I needed a behavioral health unit for someone who had shown up at my door. And when the officer responded, I had said I don't want an officer responding first. I want a behavioral health worker. The officer drove up, waited for me to go out to the car, and when I walked up to his car, he said, you know, do you still need the worker? And I said, I don't think you showing up here is a good thing. I think we want to wait for behavioral health to show up. And that was all it took, right, for him to clear the scene. He spoke with me. He said, you're not in danger. This is clearly not a situation that requires law enforcement. And the officer was able to make that assessment on the spot, like, things are okay. He drove away, and, you know, half an hour later, the mobile crisis person showed up. So the mobile unit, or the mobile crisis units that are being deployed, is an innovative approach. It is looking at each case individually, and so that means whether it's simply behavioral health, whether it's a BIPOC community, whatever it is that's happening, it is bringing it down to the personal level, and it is making it so that the response can be individualized, right? It's not one size fits all. We have, through behavioral health, I'm going to finish this statement. We have our MHSA funding, which is required to be innovative, and so that's where we're doing funding for things like CHAT, Everhart Village.
Thank you, Supervisor Ritter. Our next question is from CC4J, starting with Supervisor Lucero. If elected, how will you influence law enforcement policy and conduct in Butte County, for instance, probation, district attorney, sheriff, jail, etc.?
Okay, how will I influence? Well, first of all, I think it's going to their meetings. You know, there are a lot of meetings that these organizations meet together. There's one, and I can't remember the name of it because there's so many darn meetings like this. But I learn a lot at those meetings. I missed Sheriff for the Day training or experience, which I was really bummed about, but I had a family emergency and I could not go to that day. And I think that it's about me learning more about what they all do. I find that that's true in anything. You have to walk in someone else's shoes to really understand how to work with someone or to create policy or to create a dialogue or even how to ask a question. Because sometimes even just asking a question can be seen as a challenge to either their authority or their knowledge, when it's really not that. It's just a question. It's something that either I was asked or someone had a concern about or sent me an email about. That's typically where the questions come from. So in terms of working or influencing, again, it goes back to relationship. It goes back to who do I have relationship with? And how do I best represent my district? How do I best represent North Chico? What are the issues there? What's happening there that concern all of these different entities? And how can I make my constituents' lives better? And it's going to take all of those groups that you mentioned to make lives better, because that's why we have these groups. So it's my job to reach out to them and on your behalf.
Thank you.
The influence that we have is really to understand from all of those departments that you mentioned what they do, what is their daily experience. You know, it almost could have been staged, but it wasn't. And had I not been there, I would. But I went out on a ride along for a day with our probation department, and all we were doing was we were tracking down folks who were on the ankle monitors. That was the whole day. That's what we did until the app on the iPad that we were using stopped working, right? And we had no more GPS identification of where folks were. And had I not been on that ride along, you know, trying to find these folks, you know, I wouldn't have believed it, right? But here's this software and perhaps hardware as well. I don't know if it was the device or what it was, but they couldn't track down the folks that they needed to track down. And so I wouldn't have had an understanding of some of the challenges that they face in their job had I not been there. So I think the participation in meetings, participating in the ride-alongs, in the shoot with the sheriff and the sheriff for a day, and all of those kinds of things add to our understanding of what's going on in all of these departments. I serve on the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Committee. My first year, I remember our report had one mention of restorative justice in it. And this year, we have a full Juvenile Justice Restorative Justice Committee. So I feel that we are moving in the right direction, and that change is slow, but it is happening.
Thank you.
By the way, I don't think there's a shoot.
There is a shoot in the sheriff. There is. I did it.
All right, Mr. Jeffries, please.
I think what you said was really great. Follow-up is very important on all this. If the person just is allowed to go through the cycle of the system over and over without follow-up, without some way of improvement, I think that they'll never get better. When I saw it with my two nieces who had passed away, jail was just a way to hold on to them long enough so that they would dry out a little bit, but they were right back on the street and there wasn't any follow-up. And I'd like to see something that we would have input and the community would have input to help these folks.
Thank you. We'll now accept the next question from the press, if there is one. All right. In which case, we will go on to a question from CC4J. Describe what role you think behavioral health should play in law enforcement, starting with Supervisor Ritter.
Well, as mentioned before, I think that the mobile crisis co-response is a really critical service that we offer, and I think it needs to be expanded. We did expand over the last year, and we were fortunate enough to have some unrestricted funds in order to do so. But I would love to see that we are focusing our hours when we have our highest volume of calls, and that is not something that we have undertaken in terms of getting those statistics yet of when do the most behavioral health calls come in. You know, it does not make sense to not have mobile crisis on the weekends or the evenings, as if the crisis can wait until Monday. So I think that that's an important role that it plays. I think that we also need to be, as we are, looking at expansion of our youth services. Just like law enforcement, if we have earlier interventions, we're going to keep people from becoming comfortable in systems or becoming ingratiated in systems that are going to keep them there. So the more prevention we can do with behavioral health, the more early identification of issues, we're going to have a healthier community because the kids are not going to grow into adults with behavioral health issues. So, and I think that a lot of work still needs to be done in terms of destigmatizing behavioral health issues, and it's kind of become this catch-all where folks are saying, oh, well, they're mentally ill, and we can kind of write that off. And I think that a lot of education needs to happen because there is not one person in this room who does not know or love someone who suffers from some behavioral health issue.
I think that behavioral health is actually one of the most important tools that we're using, and that we could use that tool to make a better community. Immediately sending a cop out where behavioral health might have been a better way not to escalate the problem, I think is the way to go. When I work with the homeless in the mornings to clear them from my work, usually a kind word or a bottle of water or, you know, how can we, you know, get you to where you need to go, works a lot better than having to call up the cops. And when you call up the cops, half the time that person will walk away only to return 20 minutes later. So it didn't really solve the problem. But behavioral health, it's a follow-up. It's that follow-up that I think is really great and is on the ground and helpful and not an escalation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree that if there is a way that we can get more response from behavioral health first, that is the way to go. Other communities are managing this. I opened up with, you know, there are communities that I read in Oregon, I believe, where they have a response team that goes out, they figure out the calls, they categorize the call, and it's a mobile health crisis team that goes out, mental health crisis team that goes out first. You know, and so maybe there's 2,000 calls that come in, but of those 2,000 calls, only 150 times the police actually had to go. That's a better use of a police officer's time or a sheriff's time, and we need to really be cognizant of that. When I went out with the mobile crisis team, you know, we spent a half a day looking for a single person, you know, to make sure that she had her meds. And what we had, we didn't have GPS. Obviously, she's not wearing an ankle bracelet. She's got a behavioral health issue. So all we had is, well, she was over there behind Safeway or next to the trash bins, or she was in the alley, you know, in such and such place. We don't want our police officers chasing people around unnecessarily. They have other things to do. And I think that the more that we can focus on getting more social workers in the field, the better off we're going to be. But again, we have a lack of social workers. So this all goes back to, it would be wonderful, it would be great, but we need the people to be moving into these professions.
Thank you. Our next question is from the audience, starting with Mr. Jeffries. How would you or do you deal with witnessing or being aware of unfair practices or patterns of behavior within the criminal justice system?
Yes, I've seen that. An example is a convoy of fellow workers. We were going out to Butte College from Oroville, and we're all traveling at the same rate of speed. And the only person of color in the group of us gets pulled over. And I couldn't understand what was going on. And so we pulled over a little bit farther down the road, and we waited. And he was told that he was speeding, but we were probably going faster than he was. So there probably was some bias there. There was something going on. Maybe the officer heard a call about some other person that fit his description, but it seemed strange to us. And he was a African-American engineer. And I didn't see any reason why he was singled out.
Thank you. Absolutely. How would you or do you deal with witnessing or being aware of unfair practices or patterns of behavior within the criminal justice system?
Well, I think, the one that comes to my mind just recently was the two college co-eds who witnessed somebody being arrested, and the police came up and were very aggressive with her and, told her she couldn't film and she was getting in the way and all of this. I know the police have a job to do. We do live in a college town. And so the other things are going to happen here on campus. But again, I think it goes back to training. We've seen the footage on television. Maybe we've seen too much of that, where people are handled in the wrong way. They're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Myself, I've only witnessed this one time, and it was a scary situation. I myself was pulled over by a CHP, and it was clear that he was, and my daughter was in the car, and she was scared to death. And we were out in the rice fields. We were by ourselves. It was a scary situation. He was very out of control, and not sure why. But in their job, they can never be out of control. That's the problem, so they need more support. It goes back to what Supervisor Ritter had talked about. They need as much social and mental support, and sometimes they are more reluctant to get that assistance. So, yeah, I've seen it. I think we've all seen it. What can we do about it? Well, we can be part of the solution, and this is a beginning, dialoguing like this, keeping things transparent. I find transparency is the best way to keep things honest.
Thank you.
I don't have direct experience of observing this. The experience I have is reading our local paper and noticing when a specific officer's name comes up more than once related to use of force. But that is the extent to which I am, a witness to it. I don't know that that my experience means anything, though, because it's anecdotal, right? I mean, just like, that's like me saying, oh, well, racism doesn't exist because I'm white, right? So I'm not experiencing it, so it's not there. So I don't feel I'm the appropriate party since I have only witnessed it secondhand through our media.
Thank you. Last call for question from the press.
Sure, this is related to homelessness. the county and the Board of Supervisors provided vital funding to get Chico's pallet shelter up and running. What could the success or failure of that site mean for county government services, including the sheriff's office?
Starting Supervisor Lucero. Excuse me.
Sorry about that. What could it mean for the sheriff's office? Well, I don't think the sheriffs are going to be involved in that because that's within the city limits. So it's going to be Chico PD, if anybody. But in terms of the services, the county is going to be involved in behavioral health services and the normal types of services that would be provided through the county. My understanding is the city has their own social workers. They're screening people, determining who's going to get in. I was on a call where this was being explained that, and I think the ER did an article on it, that they had screened 56 people at this point and they had accepted like 42 or 45, something like that. To the extent that law enforcement is going to be involved, according to the Jesus Center, the way anything is going to happen at that site is outlined in that 17-page document. And if things deviate from that, I think that there's going to be an issue because there's 17 pages worth of instructions. So I think it's pretty detailed, and it would be up to that document as to how things are going to happen.
Thank you.
Not to mention a federal lawsuit. So there's that. I don't think it's a sheriff's issue, but since you asked the question specifically about the pallet shelter, I want to take just a second. You know, I feel like when we talk about behavioral health and how it links in with law enforcement and how it may be connected to issues of homelessness, it's kind of this catch-all that we think, oh, all we need to do is provide behavioral health services from the county, and then we can address all of these societal ills. Behavioral health addresses just those individuals with severe and pervasive mental illness, right? It is those who are not just depressed or anxious or having a hard time. It's severe and pervasive. And so if that is not what their diagnosis is, then they are not a behavioral health client. They may have a counselor elsewhere. They may have medications elsewhere. They may be receiving services elsewhere. But as we talk about the pallet shelter, we have, I think, 47 people in there right now. Behavioral health went out to the site, did intake and assessment with all of them. And I don't believe there was one client who signed up for behavioral health services. So we have to be clear about what the limitations are, right? This is not a fix-all. We are not going to just erect, 170 some shelters and suddenly, cure this situation.
Thank you.
It's not a sheriff's issue. It is a behavioral health issue, but it is transitional housing, and we need to have more of it and more types of housing. So far, it doesn't look like they've had much problem with the residents that are there right now, but I can see that in the future we will. It really matters who we're going to put into these houses. Is it going to be the people that are most severe with mental issues, or is it going to be people who really just need a home? And I know they all need a home, but maybe some of these homes aren't pallet shelters.
Thank you. We will now move to closing statements, starting with Supervisor Ritter.
Oh my goodness. You stuck it out. Well, I want to thank you first for doing the forum, and in person, it feels really good to be back in person, so I'm happy to be here. I have really been challenged over the last 3.5 years on the board. It was a steep learning curve to jump in during a time of disaster, which Supervisor Lucero and I did, and neither of us have served at any time other than during a declared disaster. So I am really looking forward to your support and to being able to serve another term as your representative, and hopefully serving during a time perhaps of some more normalcy.
Thank you.
It all has to do with quality of life. You know, if we feel safe in our homes, if we feel safe in our parks, if we feel that people are infringing on our rights and our places that we like to have recreation, that's what it really comes down to. If we don't feel safe in those places, then what are we doing? We need to get out there. We need to talk to our police. We need to work with our community organizations. If you feel that these things aren't happening for you, then we need to get new people, new blood in there, or just new ideas. And I think that I'm a new idea and a new blood, and someone who has worked with governments and the police and first responders of all kinds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's about perspective. I think that we have lost perspective in our city of Chico. I recently had a friend who came up from Los Angeles. He's actually a professional acquaintance. He serves as the founder of WELL, which is Water Education for Latino Leaders. And he had never been up here, and he wanted to see the Oroville Dam, and then he came over to Chico, and I took him to 1 Mile. And he was just astonished at how beautiful 1 Mile is. And there were so many people there. He said, do you get a lot of people here just coming here? Do they just swim here? And I said, oh yeah, we get a lot of people here. And then I took him up to 5 Mile. And then I just took him downtown. He wanted to go walk at the university. We walked around downtown. There were people in the parks. The streets are beautiful. We have incredible shops. And yet what we continually hear is the fear that keeps popping up everywhere. I can't do this, I can't do that. I have had a business in downtown Chico for 6 years. I too I actually learned to work with the homeless folks who slept in my doorway. I got to know them by name. We bought them lunch every once in a while. We gave them leftovers, whatever we had. You know, we gave them blankets, we gave them clothes. But you know, they respected us. We never had to call the police, but one time. And that's when somebody tore the, rain spout off of our building and started attacking cars. Now, that's an issue. And that is a behavioral health issue. And those are the things that we're dealing with. But it's a very small percentage. So just keep the perspective. We live in a beautiful place. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of CC4J, I would like to thank our candidates once again. Thank you. For taking the time to be here this evening, and to all of you as well for coming tonight. Special thanks again to the Chico Women's Club, as well as to all our volunteers that contributed to tonight's event. If you would like to speak further to Mr. Jeffries, Supervisor Lucero, or Supervisor Ritter, you can find them in the back, as well as more information about CC4J. We wish you all a wonderful and safe evening. Thank you.